Good afternoon and welcome to all of you. I am pleased to welcome you to the defense of the dissertation presented by Wilson Angelo Espiritu in fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Theology, STD. The dissertation is entitled Locus Theologicus, Locus Politicus, a mystical political model of the Panata of the Nazareno of Quiapo. The session for the defense is hereby opened, and it is with pleasure that I now give the floor to Wilson Angelo Espiritu.
Thank you, Professor Geldof. Please be seated. We often hear the advice, if you want to avoid heated disagreements in a gathering, never talk about religion or politics. My dissertation's topic, however, lies exactly at the intersection of these two contentious domains. This afternoon, I'd like to walk you through how I consider the kind of popular piety, or according to Evangelii Gaudium, the people's mysticism in my home country, the Philippines, as a rendezvous of the sacred and the political, or in other words, a locus theologicus and locus politicus. Annually, millions of Filipinos join a festive procession called the Traslacion of the Nuestro Padre Jesus Nazareno of Quiapo, Manila. To give you a more vivid image of this devotion, let me show you a short video clip.
¡Viva Perón Nazareno! ¡Viva Perón Nazareno!
Ang krus na dating tanda ng kahihiyan at kamatayan ay naging daluyan ng buhay at kaligtasan. Sa krus, iniunat niya ang kanyang mga kamay at inialay ang kanyang buhay para sa kaligtasan ng lahat. Sa banal na krus ni Jesus, bubukan ang pag-asa at lakas upang pasanintin natin ang ating mga krus ng may pananalig at pag-ibig.
Sa ngalan ng Ama, at ng Anak, at ng Espiritu Santo. Amen. Palakpakan natin ang Poon! Viva!
In 2020, Professor Van Erp and I were fortunate to attend the last actual celebration of the Traslacion before the pandemic. I said actual celebration because during lockdowns, the procession was held only virtually through a gaming platform called Roblox. In either case, this annual tradition has been a testament of the indomitable devotion of many Filipinos to the Nazareno of Quiapo. Notwithstanding the intense devotion of Filipinos, there are proverbial elephants in our collective room that need to be acknowledged. Our nation is beset with problems like poverty, corruption, bloodsheds, just to name a few. So, on the one hand, we Filipinos must be proud of our incredible faith. But on the other hand, we seriously need societal conversion. There needs some balancing in the apparent incongruity between our popular piety and our political responsibility. As a theologian, I wanted to humbly contribute to addressing this problem. So, I explored a theological model that can best articulate and invigorate the relationship between devotion to the Nazareno and political engagement, as expressed in the Filipino popular practice of panata or pamamanata, which means taking a pledge. I'd like to walk you through my exploration in 3 steps. Excuse me. First, I will briefly explain my research. Then, I'm going to present its specific contribution and lastly, its implication. To start off, my research focused on the Filipino practice of panata. Panata typically connotes pious practices that relate to the sacred, or what I call the mystical dimension of faith. However, in my study, I realized that panata also bears a political meaning, which concerns the shaping of our shared life in society. For instance, panata has been employed on political speeches and debates during elections. But a more familiar example would be the Philippine patriotic pledge known as Panatang Makabayan, which is recited in schools during flag raising ceremonies. This panata inculcates the values of love for country and responsible citizenship vis-a-vis fidelity in prayer, pagdarasal ng buong katapatan. So, although the more common connotation of panata concerns the mystical, there's also the notion of panata pertaining to the political. My research examined whether these two distinct notions of panata overlap in the devotion to the Nazareno. My exploration was guided by a heuristic framework shaped by my analysis of theological models that relate the mystical and the political, most especially Edward Skillebek's and its reception, or recent reception. I conducted a combined qualitative study of literature, participant observation, and interviews in order to construct a thick description of the panata that values grassroots theology. This careful study of the panata served as the basis for my dissertation's theological construction. This now brings me to the original contribution of my thesis. My research midwifed an alternative expression of the panata that moves beyond its association with mystical performances that are commonly understood as apolitical. My interlocutors helped me to trace the panata's political thread in its history, scholarly discourses, and Nazareno devotees' beliefs and practices. I specifically uncovered how the panata motivates devotees to care not only about pious rituals, but also the welfare of their fellow citizens and their society, which they spontaneously express through latent and manifest political actions motivated by their panata. Based on this discovery, my thesis reframes the panata as a mystical political pledge, a joint expression of spirituality and socio-political responsibility. This panata, this model of the panata commits devotees to participate in the continuing saving action of God in the here and now. This saving action encompasses interpersonal and structural transformations that uplift the lives of those who are suffering. Let me draw excerpts from my dissertation to further explain this model. The alternative model I propose promotes the combination of contemplation and action, or prayer and political engagement. The model upholds that neither the mystical nor the political can be neglected, though one may at times require greater emphasis than the other. Nevertheless, emphasis on one of these aspects must not come at the expense of the other, since they are similarly important dimensions of the Christian faith. The qualifier mystical political joins these two dimensions as indispensable traits of the panata. The outcome is a metamorphosis of the panata from a mere popular piety to a lived witnessing of faith that engages its mystical and political dimensions. These dimensions operate like two wings that allow the panata to actualize its potential for serving God and others. The model then envisages devotion to the Nazareno to inspire political engagement, and political engagement to reify devotion to the Nazareno. In this configuration, the relationship between the mystical and the political is not unidirectional, that is, from one aspect to the other, but reciprocal, that is, from one aspect to the other and vice versa, mutually reinforcing each other. Such a relationship, such a relationship then unites the two aspects without losing their otherness. Flemish theologian Edward Skillebix refers to this relationship as a unity in tension, which is based on Chalcedonian Christology, according to which the union between the divine and the human natures of Christ does not collapse their distinction. Therefore, a mystical political pledge connects performances that engage the mystical and the political dimensions of faith without reducing or opposing them to one another. Let me now move on to the implication of my thesis. According to my proposed model, Nazareno devotees will still see the panata as a prayerful commitment, but not simply for gaining favors, but for drawing inspiration and strength to cooperate in the Nazareno's saving work in the world. Such prayer, as Skillebix puts it, is not just about contemplation, but also transformation, which then makes prayer the Christian faith's quote-unquote most critical and productive force. Prayer becomes not an end in itself, but a wellspring that nourishes and sustains Christian life so that devotees can exercise their agency in the world in cooperation with God's grace. In this way, the Panata practices strengthen the mystical relationship of a devotee to Christ and testify to this relationship by working at a structural level for a more just and humane society. Devotees who pledge allegiance to the Nazareno can participate in his saving mission to bring liberation and transformation to people in their communities and society to manifest the reign of God. Political engagement becomes part of their Christian vocation without, of course, turning it into their entire preoccupation. Political engagement is integrated with their liturgical life, making it a public performance before God and with God as the principal actor. For this reason, devotees must not be passive and reluctant towards injustice. Rather, they must become prophetic voices upholding justice and good governance, especially for the welfare of the marginalized, criticizing what is dehumanizing and unjust, but appreciating what supports the flourishing of life, promoting unity, but not to the extent of uniformity, which disregards differences and particularity, and acknowledging that, in this respect, society's political autonomy corresponds to its mystical cooperation with divine grace already operating therein. To conclude, although the mystical and the political may be contentious to discuss, I have made a case that we need to have a balanced engagement with both, since we are all connected with our Creator and with one another. Let me wrap up with a quote from Edward Skillebix that captures the gist of my thesis. Quote, "Without prayer or mysticism, politics soon becomes cruel and barbaric. Without political love, prayer or mysticism soon becomes sentimental or uncommitted interiority." End quote. Thank you very much for your attention. Good evening.
Thank you very much, Wilson, for this presentation of your doctoral dissertations. For those unfamiliar with doctoral dissertations, the rest of the procedure is actually quite logical. We will first give the floor to the promoters of the doctoral candidate, and then we will invite correctors, as we call them, to engage in the discussion and to share with us their appreciation of the candidates' work. So now it is with great pleasure that I introduce the supervisors of our candidate, Professors Mendoza and Van Erp. They have been guardian angels for quite a while and stimulated the academic development of Wilson Espiritu. Professor Mendoza is a professor at the Ateneo de Manila. He has a doctoral dissertation from KU Leuven, and we are very happy that you can be with us on this very occasion here at your own alma mater. It is with pleasure that I give the floor to you.
I have known Wilson for more than a decade, initially as a graduate student in Ateneo's Formation Institute for Religion Educators, and then later on as a colleague in Ateneo's Department of Theology. As a graduate student, he was inquisitive, focused, and driven to perform the best he could, traits that have served him well in his studies both in Manila and in Leuven. As a colleague, he was amiable, responsible, dependable, and deeply committed to the theological education of his students. It was not surprising for me that he eventually decided to pursue his doctorate in Leuven, and it has been a privilege to have journeyed with him, the culmination of which we celebrate today. I know that the journey was not easy, but he persevered with the conviction that he was not doing this only for himself, but also for his family. Without any doubt, he could not have accomplished all that he did without the loving support and sacrifice of Nev, his wife, who was also my student and mentee when she earned her master's in theological studies. Today is as much a celebration of Wilson's achievement as well as his family's support for him. I know how much his family means to him and how much they all have to sacrifice for the sake of each other. Wilson and I talk about the times when he found it challenging to find the balance between his studies and family life. And there were moments when he just had to plod on. Perhaps it was only proper that for this public defense, that we are holding it in the Faculty of Social Sciences, particularly since Wilson included in his study the lived experiences of Filipino devotees who have a panata to the Poong Nazareno. His ethnographic research, which illustrates the spirituality and theology of the ordinary devotee, provides the necessary grounding and inspiration for his own attempts to interpret and understand their panata in the context of the Philippines' socioeconomic and political realities. Lived Catholicism, as exemplified in the Traslación, is as equally important as the diverse academic attempts of theologians to make sense of the devotee's faith life. Wilson's project addresses an apparent disconnect between the fervent devotion to the Black Nazarene on the part of millions of Filipino devotees and their seeming indifference to social justice issues and concerns. He operates with the assumption that it is an integral part of the mission of the baptized person, each Nazareno devotee, and of the believing community to address social inequities by participating in the task of social transformation. In addressing this question, Wilson first begins with a survey of various efforts by different theologians to find the balance between the mystical and the political, and then presents his own model by using Skillebeck's mystical political theology. His work is an important contribution and arguably a groundbreaking effort in the task of doing theology as regards a popular religious practice, which in many instances is seen as performances that need to be purified or evangelized, rather than as locus theologicus, which can enrich one's understanding and performance of the Christian faith. I have been blessed to have journeyed with Wilson. I am confident that he will continue to contribute to doing the kind of theology that is at the service of life, one that allows itself to be challenged by lived faith and at the same time challenges that lived faith to greater fidelity to the kingdom that Jesus ushered in and proclaimed. Wilson's is an excellent study, which I hope will inspire other theologians and their dialogue partners to further explore the role of popular religiosity in the faith life of many Filipino Catholic devotees. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The other supervisor is Professor Van Erp, who occupies actually a lot of functions, many too many to mention here, but basically he is a professor of systematic theology, and both these two words are really very important to his profile. He's very systematic and he's very theological. Professor Van Erp.
Thank you very much. I'm not quite sure whether I'm going to be very systematic now, because I don't have to today. Because my task is very simple. Wilson, dear Wilson, I have to congratulate you and praise you for all the work that you have done. We've ended up here with this wonderful thesis on the Pañata, and it's been a pleasure to supervise it, and also now in retrospect to read it all again, and it makes me very proud. So you've been able to combine systematic theology with empirical theological research, and for that I think you deserve praise, and you've kept the right balance between the two, which I think you've done very successfully. You've been balancing also between the mystical and the political. So you've presented it to us just now as if it is self-evident, there's a self-evident relationship between the two. In the beginning, I was actually a little bit worried that I thought, here we have a researcher who already knows the answer to the question. Is there a balance, or is there a relationship between the mystical and political? And of course, from the start, the answer was yes. So that's not very promising for good research if you already know the answer. But I was very surprised along the way that not only through the study of different models of the Pañata, and not only of the different models of the relationship between empirical theology and systematic theology, you were actually able to be very critical. And there was a real conversation between the practice of the Pañata and the people who were involved on the one hand, and on all the different theological positions on the others. And it's that kind of critical awareness and critical work that you've done that I think we should really appreciate, and makes this thesis very special. Today, when I was making my notes to talk to you today, I found the very first email that you sent to me, which was in August 2016. And you sent the exact email to Professor Lieven-Boeve as well, and saying to the both of us, our research profiles match, I think. And so I think we both responded, but I think Professor Boeve sent you to me, and so you ended up with me. And you proposed a project on the prophetic character of suffering. Do you remember this? The prophetic character of suffering. And I actually think that although we radically changed the whole project, it is actually on that theme. So you've been quite consistent with your intentions and with your interest in your theological project. You wrote a proposal and you were successful with Global Minds. Global Minds is a fund of this university for a research project in and for the Global South. And it's a fund that makes you proud to be part of this Catholic university. They've been very generous, but I also counted the number of emails in your folder. So I've got a folder in my email program, and it says Wilson Espiritu, like for all my other PhD students. And guess what? It has 12,000 emails in it, of which 700 between you and me. And that means the rest was with Global Minds. Why am I saying this? Not just to show you that we're emailing a lot, but Wilson is very grateful, I think, for the funds that he got, but they've been very generous, but they've also been very generous with the administration. You were the very first at our faculty to profit from this fund, and so you've also been pioneering. And like the first child in the family, you then also suffer from all the mistakes that we make, and for that I apologize. But we've been going through it together, Wilson, and I thank you especially for being so patient. And you just kept on studying the rules and regulations, and you kept the patience, and you always responded to the people with style and very graciously. And so I think you definitely deserve praise. In the time that we live, you deserve praise for that as well. You've always been ambitious and always took a lot of initiative. But there was another side of that. Why were you so ambitious, and why did you always take initiative? Also because you were very worried all the time. So Wilson is someone who is always worried. And but it comes with some advantages, because you were always the first in the research group, or when it came to the administration with Global Minds, to say, there's something not right here, we need to act, we need to help each other, we need to do something. And so for that, I am definitely grateful, because if you have to work very hard and you're dealing with a lot of different projects, I could always depend on Wilson, and you always warned me, and then together we sorted it out. And that was also very helpful when we traveled to Manila. So you just showed a picture of us meeting Cardinal Tagle, and this is for me, and I'm not just saying that because I'm standing here now, but I'm actually telling you the truth. This has been the most inspirational and most impressive journey of my life to Manila. I've been there twice now, and the first time was in January 2020, just before the corona pandemic. And you organized it perfectly, and so Wilson made sure we could actually, there was this crowd of millions of people in the center of Manila, just at the beginning of the procession of the Pañata. And there was Mass at 1 o'clock at night or something, or 2 o'clock at night. And the procession started at 4 o'clock or so. And there was this big crowd, and we were standing next to the stage, and Cardinal Tagle was presiding. And there was all this joy and all this cheering, and it was this wonderful occasion. But not only that moment, but also the weeks after. And you've shown me around, you've shown me where you lived, you've told me about how you came from where you lived in the Philippines to Manila. And so I've learned a lot about your enthusiasm for the study of theology. Which was wonderful to, if you've done it yourself 30 years ago, like myself, or 35 years ago, it's wonderful to experience that again. And so with your enthusiasm has also very much impressed me. We've met Cardinal Tagle, we've met Bishop David, who is also an alumnus of this faculty, and we had lunch with him from 12 o'clock in the afternoon until 9 o'clock in the evening or so. And he was doing the talking, but it was a very impressive conversation, also about the horrors that are happening in Manila and the prejudicial killings, etc. And he was very vocal about it. So that was very impressive. And then we also met, I'm not quite sure whether you were there that day, we met Danny Pilario. We visited the burial ground of George de Schrijver. And from Danny, but also from the others in Manila, I learned what it means actually to doing theology from the margins. And it's been very impressive, and it has had a follow-up. And so with Ruben, we started a new research center between KU Leuven and Ateneo de Manila. And in a sense, it all came out of your theological project, Wilson. So we are very grateful for that, because you brought us together. But you didn't only bring the people together, you also made sure that with the content of your project, you inspired the research that we're planning to do. So you've done so much more than writing your own thesis. So I wish you all the best. You've also taught me how to teach in Manila. So I taught a course in Manila, but Wilson, and it was all very complicated. And I'm looking at Ruben here because he knows the course. And but you've helped me with setting up the course, and I followed your example. And so that's interesting when you're supervising someone, that at some point the teacher follows the example of the pupil, and this actually happened. I do hope, Wilson, that you not only will teach wherever you go after this, but you will also do more research, because you're a very promising research with lots of initiative and enthusiasm, which I think, despite all the worries and despite all the administrative frustrations, you kept the patience and you kept the enthusiasm. And I think that's a wonderful thing. So it's a privilege. It was a privilege to work with you. I hope it will maintain a privilege and a joy to work with you. So I wish you all the best, also your family and your friends. I've met a few of your friends in Manila as well. So I wish you and them all the best. And thank you very much. Thank you.
That is, of course, a lot of praise, so the expectations are really high. But we want to make sure, as a faculty of theology that takes its work in research very seriously, and therefore we invite external correctors to make sure that we can say these things. And the first corrector of this doctoral dissertation is Professor Mary Doak from the University of San Diego, whom I should also thank to be with us. You will understand that she's not with us here physically, but she's here online. Professor Doak teaches courses in Christian theology, and her specializations include liberation and political theologies, theologies of democracy and religious freedom, the goal of human life and history from a Christian perspective, and theologies of the church. So I think that she is ideally placed to be a corrector of Wilson Espiritu's doctoral dissertation. Professor Doak, you have the floor.
Let me try that again. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Professor.
Yes. Great. Thank you so much. So let me just start with adding my congratulations. Wilson, this was a pleasure to read. I really got so much. I haven't gotten so much out of reading something, let alone a dissertation, but any level of book in a long time. I found you inspiring my thought on many, many levels. You thoroughly convinced me of your overall thesis about how to understand the devotion to the Nazareno as a mystical political devotion and its potential. But in the process, you also, I found, made real contributions. I was intrigued by the models and your argument and assessment of the various models and how they fail in different ways to be both genuinely mystical and genuinely political. I think your arguments on Skillebeck's also are a rich contribution to bringing forward his the importance of his mystical political vision as a contribution to any further political theology. It made me think hard, and also convinced me that more attention to the mystical could possibly help the United States avoid some of the real problems of political engagement by Christians that we're suffering from. There's a way in which you convinced me that being more rooted in devotion, mysticism, and prayer might correct some of the vicious polarization of politics when religion gets involved. So I thank you very much for all the ways that you've inspired me to think again and more deeply about something I've been thinking about for a long, long time. I think my first question, I was intrigued to go back and pick up your discussion I think you were quite right to mention dangerous memory. And footnote, it's only one of the many small contributions is footnoted Metz there, because as I was reading throughout your argument, before I got to that section, it was always in the back of my mind, my God, this is just what Johann Metz was talking about. Our devotion to the memory of Jesus' suffering should become a liberating memory, dangerous to a political status quo that continues to cause suffering. I think it's a great point of connection between Skillebeck's J.B. Metz and the upcoming Filipino theologian Espiritu. But I have a question about that. As I was thinking about Metz and the dangerous liberating memory, it seems to me that for this devotion to realize its full, dangerously liberating political potential, it requires not only a deep compassion for other people's suffering, seen in light of our response to the suffering of Jesus Christ, but that it also requires an awareness of the role that institutional forces and historical power arrangements played in Jesus' suffering and plays in the suffering of people today. So left me wondering, not only, and I think you argued very well for the need for a proper soteriology, but don't we also then need a deep and accurate understanding of the role of historical power forces? And if we do, is it the role of theology to help provide that? My first question.
Thank you very much for your question. So indeed, it is important not to just focus on one aspect of the themes that my interlocutors have given me, and that is compassion, deep compassion to those who are suffering. And that is precisely why in the constructive part of my dissertation, I proposed a way of reinterpreting the image of the Nazareno, projecting the experience of suffering that these people endure in their day-to-day life to the image of the suffering Christ. And from there, you can have that insight that the experience of suffering is something that is serious, that requires further consideration on the part of the people to open their eyes that this suffering do not happen, these experiences of suffering do not happen in a vacuum, but there are factors that contribute to create such a system that generates suffering to the people. I think we can benefit a lot from the idea of Skillebeck's, the concept of negative contrast experience, so that supplements the idea of dangerous memory. That in the suffering of Jesus, you see also a negative experience of contrast. What should not be. God doesn't desire a world that is filled with suffering. For Skillebeck's, suffering does not come from God, but rather God is pure positivity. God is the one that counters suffering, that conquers suffering. So from that very experience of suffering, you already have that, as Skillebeck's would say, an instinctive feeling that this should not be. Suffering should not be. And I hope that if the devotees would understand that through the image of the Nazarene who is suffering, vis-a-vis their own experience of suffering, they would realize that suffering, they should begin to realize and ask, this should not be. So why is there suffering? What could be the reason why we are suffering? And then they will begin to discover, hopefully, that there are systemic factors that contribute to these debilitating situation that they are in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm struck again by your very mature both and approach to everything. Throughout the dissertation, again, your answer to me, you don't reduce anything to a simple answer or make it all one thing. If I'm hearing you right, theology then helps provide the motivation for people's further political studies. This actually leads me to another question that is as inspiring as I find this. There's something bothering me a little bit. Maybe it's the time I'm in now, maybe the age as well. But to what extent does your argument for engagement in transformative politics, because of being so convinced that this is not the will of God and should not be, doesn't transformative political action require a more or less democratic system in which people generally can make a difference? If so, do we have such a system in our current globalized world with its many anonymous power structures? I found myself somewhat sympathetic to the Filipino devotees you quoted, who are rather hopeless about changing politically as opposed to meeting people's individual needs, and also generally found politics corrupt. So I guess I would also ask then, does this system, your argument require a transformative, for transformative policies require a democratic system? Do we have it? And is there a theological role in engaging the hopelessness that people might feel?
I was supposed to say this second part of my answer a while ago, but let me now continue with that second part of my response. For Skilebix, the concept of negative contrast experience has two aspects. So on the one hand, there is the aspect of what should not be. On the other hand, the other aspect of suffering is the aspect of what should be. It gives us hope. It gives us a sense of, since this experience of suffering is not the will of God, then what should be the will of God? It points to a reality, a vision of God, of the dream of God for the world. So that is the other side of the coin, so to speak, for that experience of suffering. So do we value a democratic system in order for us to fulfill or realize that dream of what should be in this world? I believe so. Democracy is important, although I'm not an expert in political science. But I would say that it is important to listen to the voice of the people, especially those who are in the fringes of society, to give voice to these people, to listen to them, and to construct and organize our societies according to the dialogue happening within these variegated voices in society. So it's not just one predominant voice coming from, let's say, a tyrant or a dominating party, but it is a dialogue among different voices. And that is what democracy is all about. Do we have it? I'm afraid that we are still in the process of discovering and redefining how democracy should work for the benefit of the common good. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I have time to ask one more question. I think to me, it's a testimony to the richness of your work that I just keep finding more and more things I'd like to discuss with you further. But let me just limit it to this one further question. At first, frankly, I was relieved that you didn't discuss the Hauerwasian model of religion and politics that's become so popular in the United States, which is that where Christians, it's the Christian church as a witnessing community, somewhat separate from politics of the state as an alternative over against the model. But I find myself wondering more and more that political resistance community model at least is right to the extent that it calls for the church to be a formative community that forms people as church to be different and to witness differently. And that raises the question to my mind of, don't we need then also somewhat to transform somewhat the structures and practices of the church so that it forms people for a more democratic politics, community that learns in church to listen to the voices of the marginalized and most forgotten.
I believe the mission of the church is not just ad extra, but also ad intra. And there is this notion from Skillibex that the church is the sacrament of the world. And if we want to have this transformation happening out there in the polis, the democracy, the democratics, we hope that as the church becomes the sacrament in the world, the church should be the beacon of lending voice to the voiceless, even within the Christian community, within the church itself. So the developments that we have right now, given the trend of synodality, although it's still a bit messy, but we are slowly, as in the procession of the Black Nazarene would say, unti-unti, slowly and slowly. Hopefully we'll get there to that eschatological fulfillment eventually will be. But I agree with you that the changes should happen, which should begin within the church, so that we could be not only role models, but the very witnesses of being a people of God in the world.
Thank you very much. I'm sure my time is up. I wish we could keep going. Really appreciate the sophisticated, mature level of your thoughts on these subjects.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Professor Doka, and I'm sure that there will be opportunities in the future to continue this conversation. Our second corrector is Professor Antonio Sison from Catholic Theological Union. He is a professor of systematic theology and the Vatican Council, the Second Vatican Council Chair of Theology. And he has done a lot of research and written books about topics that come very close, content-wise, to Wilson's doctoral dissertation. I mentioned just the latest book that is of interest is The Art of Indigenous Inculturation, Grace on the Edge of Genius. So, Professor Sison, the floor is yours.
We cannot hear you clearly yet, Professor. Can you try speaking again? I can hear you, but it's a little bit, the sound is not clear. Maybe they are suggesting that you should try speaking closer to the microphone.
How about this? Does it sound clearer? Perhaps?
Well, at least I can hear something. Yeah.
Not a good thing.
Okay. I'll try. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. Okay, Professor. I'll try to listen. If I cannot understand it, then I'll just ask for you to repeat it. Thank you.
Okay. Well, first of all, congratulations, Wilson, for this excellent work. I know that given time and the right venue to share your work, I think more and more scholars will realize that what you've done is an outstanding interweaving of a number of elements that would otherwise not be glued together had it not been for the master reason. Did you hear that?
The last part I did not hear clearly, but most of it I heard. But thank you very much.
I should send this on a written form so that you don't miss that. But thank you. This is a joy to review, and I know that you've opened horizons for further distribution of your work in other forms. So thank you so much. We're very, very proud of you, especially as a Filipino theologian myself. This has been a quite an affirming and also a proud moment to see a scholar of your caliber defend his dissertation and also, defend a promising horizon for Philippine theology. Thank you. So let me ask this question. You have specifically identified the soteriological work of Edward Philibert as your heuristic framework for determining the inextricable link between mysticism and politics. My question would be, just reading your dissertation initially, the immediate heuristic framework that comes to my mind is liberation theology. In the work, for example, of Gustavo Gutierrez in The God of Life, he makes that link between theology and practice quite clearly in soteriological terms as well. And considering our shared Hispanic post-colonial history, it would seem like a Latin American theologian would be the more proximate reference for you, considering your work, which is deeply embedded in looking into popular piety from a grassroots level. So I guess if I were to summarize that question, why not liberation theology?
Thank you very much, Professor, for your kind words and, of course, for this very interesting question. Yes, it is indeed like intuitive to think that if you are studying something about the context of people who are suffering, the immediate theology that will come to your mind as a framework would be liberation theology. Skilebix himself was an interlocutor to liberation theologians, Latin American liberation theologians for that matter. But what enticed me in the theology, or soteriology in particular, of Edward Skilebix is his notion of negative contrast experience, as I already explained a while ago. Professor Van Erp mentioned that at the onset of my research exploration here in Leuven, I was very interested in fascinated even, in the theme of suffering. And that concept of Skilebix really struck me. The idea that suffering has these two dimensions, revealing that this is not supposed to be the case, and on the other hand, telling us what should be the case, the dream or the vision of God for us. And that theology of hope that I got from the soteriology of Skilebix is something that really, I thought, really would be helpful for this particular context that I'm dealing with, the devotion to the Nazareno of Quiapo. When I was doing my research and theological reflection on the Nazareno devotion, one thing that struck me was the image of the Nazareno, which is an image of a suffering Christ. You can see there in front of you. It's a suffering Christ, and yet it is wearing something that is glorious, something that is unusual for a suffering person. So that gave me the immediate connection between this concept of Skilebix, of negative contrast experience, the contrast experience of suffering, and the contrast, and then its contrast, which is glory. Glory that brings hope, that amidst suffering, there could be hope. That in this suffering, we can encounter God in a paradoxical way. So that is one powerful concept that I found, a treasure I found in the soteriology of Skilebix. But aside from that, Skilebix's theology, as he said in your interview with him, the golden thread of his theology is liberation. So Skilebix's theology is liberative, even though he's not officially part of the Latin American liberation theology. His theology is also liberative, and I would even say political. And it has the potential a strong potential to speak to the context in the Philippines, context of the Nazareno devotees. And in a more practical sense, my project is within the framework of Global Minds, which allows a dialogue and exchange between North and South. And it is very interesting to facilitate that dialogue between Skilebix, a Flemish theologian here from Flanders and from Belgium, and the Filipino context. So it dovetails the aim of my scholarship. So I really wanted to produce an original contribution, something that may not be instinctive, as I have said at the beginning, that we will consider a Latin American liberation theology or theologian. So what I wanted to provide is an original contribution, something perhaps unprecedented. And that is what I found in the soteriology of Edward Skilevix.
Thank you. I suppose that's right on my computer. Does that sound better?
Can you repeat it? Sorry, we cannot hear it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very satisfied with your answer. First, you mentioned something about Skilevix theology, not just the soteriological trajectory, but if you read through a number of his points on negative experiences in contrast, he also emphasizes the whole inspiring horizon, which is very apparent in his work. That's quite relevant to the context that we come from. So that in itself is a really satisfactory answer. The other point that you made is you're not doing what gravity forces you to do. That's the job of a theologian, to explore new connections. And in order to bring about, if I could put it this way, a new creation. And what you've done as a weaver of theology is to bring East and West together in an intercultural creative dialectic. And for that, I applaud you. It takes guts and a vision to do that. You didn't do what is simply easy and served on a silver platter to you. You explore other avenues in order to bring about new insights. And that is why your work is a contribution and not simply a repetition of what has been done many times before. So actually, congratulations on that. I really deserve applause for that particular connection that you did very successfully. My follow-up question is this. You mentioned in your summary of each point today that Skilevix's proposal of negative contrast experience is not applicable to every conceptual reality, especially in particular cultural context. Can you expound a little bit more on this argument that you made?
Okay. For Skilevix, negative contrast experience is like a pre-religious experience. Okay? And that experience leads to, according to him, resistance, protest, and transformation. But what I've found among the devotees of the Nazareno is not the manifestation of this concept in a linear fashion. It doesn't necessarily happen like that after they have this experience of suffering, they lead to protest in a manner that we usually or typically understand what protest is. They don't go there holding these woke aphorisms, placards, protesting against government or whatsoever. But there is another way of resistance that I have noticed among these devotees, and that I found that they express through their devotion to the Nazareno. So in that manner, the resistance is not in a direct way, but it's implicit in their practices. On the other hand, I have also noticed that there are some devotees who, I would say, possess this more developed social consciousness. And because of that, they are able to do active resistance in various ways. Like, for example, the one I cited in my dissertation, a devotee I have interviewed, who was active on social media, expressing or voicing her criticisms against the government. And there was also this another devotee who was a catechist, and she was very vocal about the political issues in society, and she was teaching her students about the Catholic social doctrine. And of course, lest I forget, the government officials that I have interviewed who, by virtue of their devotion to the Nazareno, were moved to resist the policies of the government that, for them, they see endangers the lives of their constituents. Say, for instance, the barangay captain I interviewed, he said he did not acquiesce when he was asked to provide a list of accused drug dependents or drug pushers in his jurisdiction, because that's tantamount to saying these people will be slaughtered. But he did not cooperate. He resisted. He protested in order to save the lives of these people. That's grounded in his devotion to the Nazareno. So there are cases where devotees could manifest the concept of negative contrast experience as awareness, resistance, protest, and transformation. But there are also instances where it's not linear as Skillebeck would have wanted. So what I propose then would be the linkage between these implicit expressions of resistance to the more explicit expression of resistance, similar to what the other devotees have gained. And the key, as I would say, the key mechanism for that would be the development of social consciousness.
Thank you. That's an excellent explanation on why we have made that thesis statement summary, and I very much appreciate the way in which you saw this as you looked into the context of the subject and determined whether that living needs more humanity. And that's exactly what you did here. And how much time for one short question? You've spent time with the devotees, with the Nazareno profession, you've mingled with them and spoke to them and came out with a survey. If you had one carry-out value, just one, as a theologian, from this interaction in the grassroots level, what would that one thing be that you can take away with you as you move along in theology?
Off the top of my head, I will immediately say it's the theme, prevalent theme among all the devotees I have interviewed. Walang hanggang pasasalamat, endless thanksgiving. Their devotion is not primarily about asking something from God. It's more of thanking God for the many blessings that they have received. Even before they ask or they seek for those blessings, they have already received it. And that's why they make the panata. The common misconception is that these people are doing these popular devotional practices because they are asking something. But if you ask them, most of them will tell you that's not the reason why they do this. It's because they want to express their gratitude towards God. And for me, that's key theological takeaway from this research.
Thank you very much, Wilson. I'll be right back.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you very much, Professor Sisson. Our third corrector, last but not least, is Professor Jacques Hars, who is Emeritus Professor of the same research unit as the one that Professor Van Erp belongs to, the research unit of systematic theology and the study of religions. And for a very long time, Professor Haars has chaired the Center for Liberation Theologies. Professor Haars, you have the floor.
At least I have the advantage of being here in your presence. And I mean, it's nearly finished, huh? So don't. I would like first to thank you for this work. I've read it with a lot of pleasure, and it challenged me quite a lot, and in a number of things that are very dear to me. So it's a very well presented work. I would have liked to see the interconnections between the different chapters maybe a little more worked out. The chapters sometimes give the idea of being a little bit separate from one another, at least in my mind. But that was no problem in the end. They show a mastery of the subject from very different perspectives, which is truly impressive. So this thesis, moreover, this thesis is very important, not only for that concrete situation that you study, but the methodology that you use, the approach that you use, the willingness to enter into discussion concerning the Panata or concerning popular religiosity practices is something which can be used in other circumstances too. I'm not saying that one has to come to Schillebeeckx always. I suppose the choice for Schillebeeckx was also a bit a consequence of your promoter. No? Well, I'm not sure. So, but it's a good choice. Huh? I think it's a good choice. But there could be other theologians, but it's that willingness to enter into a dialogue to clarify a profound idea, namely that in popular religiosity, which is a gift to us all, it's a very vulnerable gift, but it's also the expression of the faith of people. And I learned that in Latin America, that people express themselves in ways that are very creative and sometimes very different from the liturgies or the rituals we would develop or would have developed in the institutional church to which we belong. That reminds me, if I forget at the end, I have to ask you a bit of a subversive question, but I'll do that at the end because I don't want. The question that also struck for me is the question that has come up so many times here, and maybe I will not make you repeat what you have already said a couple of times, but it's that question of the significance of suffering. So the soteriology and how this idea of the negative contrast experience plays in this. And I find it very interesting. I read your fifth annexed thesis is specifically about that. And I think I read it a little bit differently when I hear you now. I read it a little bit differently than what you meant. Huh? So you say Schillebeeckx's notion of negative contrast experience that leads to liberative actions does not correspond to how things are in the real world. Such experiences generally do not happen in a linear or direct fashion among devotees of the Nazareno, which you just explained in answering Professor Sisson, who have their own particular but sensible means of resisting suffering. I understood that as a criticism of Schillebeeckx, actually, in the sense that this notion of the negative contrast experience, with all the strength it contains and the invitation to resistance, is not fully able to explain the resistance that people have to suffering in a practice such as the Panata, such as being present with the... And it made me think of, I'm a Jesuit, which is an advantage and a disadvantage at times, but I think at this time an advantage. It made me think of what is called in the spiritual exercises the third week, which is the week of nearness to the suffering Christ, the suffering God, the absent God, but it's that deep co-feeling in suffering with God. There is a way in which, and the negative contrast experience, by wanting to resist in a very explicit way, but there is also a way which I find it very difficult to express, so I'm not sure I do it well, but there is a way in which God commits to suffering, or commits to us in suffering. I mean, there is a choice to go the way of suffering, which says that there is a very deep critical realism with regard to what human reality and creational reality is, also on that side of suffering. So, in a way, you cannot avoid it. Mm-hmm. And that is not a kind of a masochism or spiritual masochism, but this is also a very powerful political attitude. You go as a way of resistance through the suffering. Bonhoeffer is in Flemish, or in German, it's called, his diary is called Widerstand und Ergebung. So resistance and, how would you say this? Ergebung is overgave. Huh? Yeah, it's the gift of oneself, but it's very interesting because Germans also end their letters with ihr Ergebener, which means I'm yours. Yours, what we would say in English, but it's more effective than that. And so resistance and this overgave, surrender, it's translated in English, but it's a bit of a dangerous word, surrender. But it has you, and that's the life of Bonhoeffer at the end also, is discovery. If I want to work soteriologically with God, I have to go through that suffering. Mm-hmm. I cannot, there is a Christ at the moment when Christ has to say, I cannot do anything else than to go through the suffering. And this is what God does. And I feel that when I see these images and when I see the popular religiosity as expressed in Latin America, but also certainly in the Philippines. And I think there's something of that you want to say, which is something more. It's a kind of a spiritual expression, a mystical expression of that dangerous memory of Metz. Mm-hmm. So the two concepts, I think, are necessary. Would you agree with that, or?
Certainly.
Okay. No, but I really think that's, and so your thesis made me think a lot about that. And I was very glad to hear Professor Van Erp in the beginning saying that had been your primary motive. So I hope you will pursue this, because it is a very complicated mystical, spiritual issue. How can we, for God's sake, how can God choose to die on a cross? It's that nagging question, why don't you send your angels to crush this whole, which is something that you could continue to feel in this negative contrast experience. We're going to fight it. And the Jesuits have lived that also in the general congregation. So it's a bit of a tricky issue, but I hope you will pursue that, because it's one of your key questions, key issues, and how you explain it, you're really very close to that mystery. So at the core, there's a mystery there. Anyway, I'm praising you. So
Thank you.
But it brings me also to that question of popular religiosity, which is a concept that you do not fully explain or work out in your thesis. You work on that Panatta perspective, but the concept itself of popular religiosity, that popular creativity, but at the same time the great vulnerability of it, it can be abused, it can be misused, but it produces a lot of energy and it produces a lot of power also. The issue of power in relationship to the Panatta or in relationship to popular religiosity, how would you deal with that? So both the power that is exercised in abusing it, but also the power that is exercised by living it. So that concept of power is something very important for politics, I think. And isn't it born into a deep spiritual experience if you have popular religiosity? So the issue of power, have you given that thoughts? Or if you have, I would like to know your thoughts. Yeah.
First of all, I did not include an extensive discussion of popular piety per se in the dissertation because I have worked on that in my research master's thesis and I have made several publications on this theme. That's why I put it as a footnote in the general introduction. So I dealt with popular piety, its potential to be used to be instrumental for social transformation, but there are also, I would say, opening for abuses, as you said, and it can be misused by people in power instead of liberating people, but they can misuse it for oppressive purposes. So that being said, um, I did not made I did not make an explicit consideration of power in this dissertation because um, that's not the main framework that I was operating it with. My main framework was the relationship between the mystical and the political. Political not in a strict power sense or in the sense of those people who are politicians, professional politicians, or those who do statecraft, but in a more general sense where people, even from those in the grassroots, can participate in the organization, structuring, and governance of society. That is why, in the recommendation part of the dissertation, I made that recommendation that for further studies, it's one thing that could be further explored. In particular, the dynamics of power within the devotees, because I noticed that during my interviews that even among the devotees themselves, there is politics. Uh, if you've seen in the video a while ago, these group of men who are in charge of securing the image of the Nazareno, and then those regular devotees known as the mamamasan. So there is also clash of power within, and then the different groups of devotees. I have heard that there are also political issues within the devotees themselves. So I did not delve into this issue in the dissertation, but I mentioned it in the dissertation nevertheless.
Yeah. I think it would be an interesting because we are always afraid to talk about power. What is kind of power of the Nazareno?
Mhm.
What kind of power does the Nazareno inspire in us to subvert some other kinds of power? That's politics. What is, yeah. So it just came to me, that's an interesting, and it's easier to approach that issue of power, I think, through a reflection on popular religiosity. Sorry, I say popular religiosity because with popular piety, you already assume that one side is more emphasized in the popular approach to religiosity than the other side. I could say popular politics as a response to the piety. I mean, you take one side of the balance in the word. So which, yeah, I prefer the expression popular religiosity to popular piety. Piety is a part of it. And that's what you want to say, basically. So that it's a part of it and that that it's more also than that. Anyway, a second question that was not raised here, and which for me is also a very important one, is the tension between the individual and the community. It's the ecclesiological. I mean, how do you move from individual faith to an ecclesial faith? And very often we say the ecclesial faith is the faith that is given to the individual through the church. But I think it's more than that. It's how does the faith of individuals and the commitment of individuals become the faith of a community that defines itself by that faith and commits itself through that faith and in that faith. So that aspect of the link between the individual and the community, the link between the individual and the social. It's not only the individual in his or her own experience who's going to decide to act or to commit. There is a new organization growing in this. You spoke about synodality, and I found that a very good reply to the question of democracy, because democracy and synodality is not just identical. For a Jesuit, this is common discernment. So but there is a deep question also in Ignatian spirituality. How do you come from individual discernment, or what is considered individual discernment, to a common discernment? It is not always the experience of popular religiosity, although it is at the level of the individual, is it not always also an ecclesial? That is a community around the Nazareno that is created and influences on the depth of the individual faith experience. So that tension between individual and social, which is an ecclesiological tension. What do you think about that, and how would you approach that?
Absolutely. There's this tension between the individual and the group or the community in the Panata to the Nazareno, and that is very prominent, not only during my interviews with devotees, but also with the scholarly literature that I have studied. A lot of these scholars who are studying the devotion to the Nazareno affirm the communal dimension of the Panata. The Panata is taken by an individual devotee, but its expression is something made in public.
But is there not a Panata taken by the community of these devotees who is there? I mean, that it's not only the individual commitment, but the commitment of a community.
Yeah, so
sorry.
So that's why there's the tension between the personal, the individual, and the group, because the pledge is taken by the individual as a response to, let's say, the experience of grace that they have received in their life, but their expression or the fulfillment of that pledge leads them to community. And that's why, as you saw in the video, they join this grand procession of the Traslacion to publicly express their pledge, their panata to the Nazareno in community, in solidarity with other devotees. So it cannot be a private, individualistic pledge. There's always this communal dimension of the pledge. Now, what I'm advocating in the dissertation is precisely the common recognition of the panata as an allegiance to the Nazareno, to Christ, and to his saving mission. The saving mission whose vision is the manifestation and the realization of the kingdom of God in the here and now. And there goes that communal dimension of the pledge, that we are all in this together as Nazareno devotees, as pledgers of the Nazareno, to work for reforms in society. And that is also affirmed by other scholars outside theology, that they have seen that the panata leads to social responsibility. I'm referring to the researchers from Ateneo de Manila University, from the psychology department. They made that observation that women devotees of the Nazareno are led by their panata to do something for their society. So there's a social dimension of their panata.
But that is always the social dimension of the individual panata.
Mhm.
What I mean is something that maybe goes more in the direction of sacramentality. That the social group that is formed around the panata becomes the sacrament of something very deeper, but that belongs to the group as a whole. So that it's a movement of the group as a whole. And if I may push it a little bit further, could we say that the panata of the people who participate, also the individual panata, is actually a deep participation in a panata of Christ himself?
That's precisely what I have developed in the last chapter of the dissertation, where I argued that the panata can be construed as a sacramental performance of the reign of God. So there goes the communal dimension, the ecclesiological, social dimension of the panata, as pledgers of the Nazareno who are united with the pledge of Jesus for the kingdom of God. And at the same time, they themselves who perform that sacramental pledge become a sign and instrument or effectors of that grace in the world, in their society.
Of that pledge of God
Of
himself.
that pledge of God himself.
Yeah.
That's the vision, and that's the idea, the main idea that I was pushing for in the last part of the dissertation.
Okay. Can I ask my subversive question? That would be the
Sure,
last question.
sure.
It's if we applied your critical realism and your methodology to settled sacramental and liturgical practices in the church, where would that lead us to? So we apply it here to the panata, which is I would say, paraliturgical kind of practice. Huh? What happens when you apply what you said, and what I think is correct? Huh? So I'm not criticizing, but what happens when you apply that to not the paraliturgical, but the liturgical situation in the church?
I'm all for that idea. Certainly, we have to give priority for our liturgy, which is, as Sacrosanctum Concilium would say, the source and summit of our faith. But I'd say let us not disregard these, what you call the paraliturgical activities, because reality principle would demand from us that these people who are practicing popular piety, and I insist on calling it popular piety,
that's perfect to me, yeah.
They may not be the mainstream in the church, but these are genuine expressions of faith, nevertheless. And it can be, as Pope Francis would say in Evangelii Gaudium, an opportunity, a great opportunity for evangelization, especially in this context. I was in Scarpenhovel a few weeks ago, and I talked to the rector. He told me that there are people who would visit there who would light a candle, even though they are non-practicing Catholics anymore. It's estranged from the church. Even in the Philippines, there are people who we call them KBL Catholics, which stands for Kasal Binyag Libing, baptism, wedding, marriage, baptism, and funeral.
Yes.
These are the three instances where they go to church.
Yeah, that's the same here. Yeah.
But then they practice robust popular piety. How do you explain that? I mean, I'm not saying that we decentralize the church, but what I'm saying is let us not set aside the practices of these people. Let us recognize that although most people would say that these are the fringes of our faith tradition, but I'm imploring in this dissertation to find the center in that periphery, as Pope Francis would say. Now, having said that, how do I envision if we apply that framework of the relationship between the mystical and the political to our liturgy? I'd say that that would be if I may borrow a term, an empowering moment for our liturgy. Say, for example, baptism. We have to recover the value of being pledgers of Christ. That's the point of our baptism, being conscripted to, as the Ignatian imagination will ask of us, to imagine that we are following the King, Jesus of Nazareth. So we are being conscripted by virtue of our baptism. We have that pledge to Jesus of Nazareth and to his kingdom. And if we apply that, that can lead to transformation. If all of us who are baptized would realize that our baptism is not only a gateway to the other sacraments, but rather a gateway also to participate in the disclosure of God's kingdom in the world out there, then
So in
that
politics.
also in
Yes.
politics, and that is the fulfillment
Yes.
of
No, I
God's
fully
kingdom
agree
in the
with you.
here and now.
This is one of the things I found so powerful in your thesis. You actually say something on the very creative paraliturgical area, but which is valid for the liturgical area, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much, because you made me think quite a lot. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor. Oh.
Thank you very much, Professor Haars. Oh, I wished I had been a corrector myself, but I must, but I must stay in my role and do the following official announcement. The Board of Examiners will now adjourn for deliberation.
So we have invited some to prepare some food, and they're here. But I heard that
They cannot
go there yet.
there at
What would you
this moment.
suggest?
Just
We can
wait.
just wait
Yeah.
somewhere here. Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No problem.
Because it's, I mean, if
They're
it's
over
like
there, right? Yeah.
an independent caterer, it doesn't matter that much. If it's students of KU Leuven, then no.
Okay.
Okay.
I see. But I think that the caterer that we hired should have set up by now.
I think I heard a van and all, so I think it's fine.
The clergy would push the image out of the church, lock the church, I was there on my own, and at a certain moments you were just you had those waves of people bringing you closer to the image. My feet were not touching the ground, and so if I fall down now, I'm dead.
Those were
Quite an experience. It's extraordinary that you are able to bring there.
Oh yeah.
That's a very good experience.
So you could see what's going on with the devotion in Quiapo and also in other parts of it. I also went to Quiapo and he came back. So when he went down, he came back to Quiapo.
That's very good.
For him, that's very good.
That's very good. Yes, here we are. If you have not been there, you have no idea. No reason to worry.
If the dean's office has advised
No numbers quite well because we are together. We were together. Community school resisting the board of the community. We had 2 meetings. Now he's out. He's retired.
Oh, I see him every morning when I go to his he will always cross my back every morning. He goes to work very early. Just the time when the kids are going to school.
I think you need a
If we don't have an opportunity, perhaps we could also visit your wedding.
I will not go back directly because your wife is studying. Yeah. So you are staying here.
We're not sure part of this. I had to believe online classes. The moment online classes were that's why I had to see
Yes, exactly. Yes.
He always posts on Facebook your classes. I always he would
way more smaller than I thought. Daddy! I didn't finish. I love you, Daddy.
Yeah. Are you
Peter, do you want to color on my paper kit? I have a highlighter. You draw something? Not blow that on, okay? Timothy, do you want to play tic-tac-toe? Can I show you? Alright, let's go together.
you belong with the French.
Daddy, can you give me the paper what I need? I want to have a job. Can I go play with them? Sort of. I agree. Ball. I'll give you a pen.
Just so you know, I think so we can see you if you stand here, we can see you if you stand here. So just Norm, yeah, just as long as you're in this range, in between here and say here, we can see. And it's just for the recording, for the live stream, so that you know that you're in your video. Yes, it's fine. It's just before you can see everything, but then you can see now.
Examination for the degree of Doctor of Theology. Wilson Angelo Espiritu has defended a dissertation for the degree of Doctor of Theology, STD, entitled Locus Theologicus, Locus Politicus, a mystical political model of the Pagnata to the Nazareno of Quiapo. Having deliberated, the Board of Examiners has come to the following decision. Wilson Angelo Espiritu has completed the examination successfully and is therefore granted the Doctor of Theology, STD. By obtaining the doctoral degree, dear Wilson, you commit yourself as a doctor to act also in the future in accordance with the basic principles of research integrity as described in the ALEA European Code of Conduct: reliability, honesty, respect, and accountability. Dear Dr. Espiritu, my sincere congratulations to you. We have heard today many inspiring things, many deep things. The beautiful things have been has said that bear a lot of truth in them. You were praised for being focused. You were praised for being committed. Things have been said about being a family man, but also about perseverance. At an academic level, there were also many different worlds that you combine. There is a long journey, there is lived experiences, there is social sciences, there is systematic theology, there is dogmatic theology, there is many different aspects, and this multi-perspectival reality was really praised by all the jury members. So, as in the name of the faculty, actually, I should not only congratulate you, but also express a great word of thanks. You did a lot of things in the framework of the collaborations, the Global Minds, all these issues, but also in furthering theological thinking. I think you did a great service. I may be a little bit naive, but I think that theological thinking itself is also a great service to the church. And we should thank you for the power with which you think. We know that there's different aspects of power, but there is a lot of power in you and in your theological thinking. Power that other people will in the future certainly rely on and benefit from. And as a token of our gratitude in the name of the faculty, it's my honor actually to offer to you this. We give it, as you know, to all our new doctores, and we ask them to give it a special place in the rooms where they will work or live, and remember the good time in Leuven, the things that you learned. And if people are curious to know what it means, explain them that Leuven is a good place for doing theology. So, my sincere congratulations to you, Dr. Espiritu, and I think that we can give him a great applause for what he achieved.
Completing this project while my wife, children, and I were living abroad is not a turn of events that I expected at the outset of my doctoral studies. A Nazareno devotee once told me to be cautious in asking the Nazareno for anything, since such requests may be granted in surprising ways. As if to test this warning, I promptly asked the Nazareno for a scholarship at KU Leuven. The first miracle that then came my way was astounding enough. I was able to travel to Leuven for an international conference, my first, and while there, submit my scholarship application in person. Then I returned to Manila to await the result. After a few months, the Nazareno unexpectedly visited my university campus. I had the privilege of being one of his bearers during the procession, and there I prayed for the success of my scholarship application. In the summer of that year, I learned I had been granted KU Leuven's Global Mind Scholarship, and the rest, as they say, is history. Through all the difficulties I encountered during my doctoral studies, I have sensed the guidance of the Nazareno who gave me the strength to persevere. So I owe him my utmost gratitude. This dissertation, in fact, is the fulfillment of my panata to him. This project would not have happened without the generous support of those who served as instruments of the good Lord's grace. Words cannot adequately express my gratitude to my promoter, Professor Stefan Van Erp, and to my co-promoter, Professor Ruben Mendoza, for guiding me throughout this doctoral journey. They have been very considerate mentors who patiently walked me through the process of completing the doctoral milestones and likewise offered personal advice on enhancing my approach to research, gaining confidence, and even reducing my anxiety. Members of the defense panel, Professor Mary Doak, Professor Antonio Sison, and Professor Jack Hars, deserve special thanks for diligently reading my dissertation and offering constructive feedback. I had the pleasure of working with esteemed colleagues at the Fundamental and Political Theology Research Group, as well as the Systematic Theology and the Study of Religions Research Unit, who provided helpful comments on my work. Special mention goes to Dan Minch, Pascal Ikena, Anthony Atansi, Jake Benjamins, John Bosco Camoga, Richard Stein Vord, Anton Lingier, Thomas Aquinas Kiokoe, Willibaldos Gaut, and Danilo Agustin. I would be remiss in not thanking, of course, Professor Judith Gruber for her remarks during my last research unit presentation, which sparked the idea of the main title of this dissertation. Of course, Professor Geldof for being the presider of my defense today. I am immensely grateful to the Global Minds Scholarship, which funded 5 years of research masters and doctoral studies in Leuven, including financial provisions for research resources and conferences. I could not have efficiently carried out my research without the help of Lisbeth Linknecht, I hope I pronounce it correctly, of the International Office, and Jacqueline Van Hal of our faculty's financial antenna. Both of them painstakingly assisted me regarding research expenses, and they deserve special appreciation. I would also like to thank all the people from the International Office and our faculty who helped me with administrative concerns. Martin de Koning, Roland Jansen, Anne Hassendox, Linse Vermeulen, Ingrid Walters, Evelyn De Necker, Philip Ons, and Martin van Beek. Heartfelt gratitude goes to the incredibly thoughtful administrators and personnel of Ateneo de Manila University. I would like to thank Professor Maria Luz Vilches, the Vice President for the Loyola Schools, and Professor Jonathan Chua, the Dean of the School of Humanities, for approving my study-related requests, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Their approval enabled me to complete this research project without having to leave my family. Special thanks are due to the LS administrative personnel who assisted me in various logistical matters: Jessica Laroya, Paula Angeles, and Donna Manuel. I likewise acknowledge the support of my colleagues in the theology department, particularly those who stayed connected with me all throughout these years of my study. I could not have undertaken this journey successfully without the Jesuit fathers who accompanied me. I especially thank Father Albert Alejo, who inspired the idea of this project and who served as my regular consultant. Father Adolfo Dacanay, for encouraging me to pursue doctoral studies in Leuven. Father Asandas Balchand, who helped me in my discernment. Father Roseler Atiliano, for introducing me to the parish office of the Quiapo Church. My LST professors, particularly Father Robert Godang, for his letter of recommendation and for welcoming me to the Jesuit residence in Brussels during my first visit here in Belgium. Father Johnny Go, for introducing me to critical realism and for his insightful contributions to my research. And of course, my spiritual director in Leuven, Father Jos Moons, who prudently gave me practical pointers and sustained me on this journey. I'm also deeply thankful to the Office of the Minor Basilica of the Black Nazarene, especially Monsignor Hernando Coronel, for supporting me in my field research, the gatekeepers and devotees, especially Mr. Arnold Regino, who generously shared their time and experiences. On a more personal note, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Doctors Ed Guzman, Marilu and Maricel Ibita, and all my friends, titas, aunts, and research companions here in Leuven for journeying with me through the highs and lows of my projects. Although I cannot mention you one by one, please know that I sincerely appreciate your support for me on this journey. Also, to my parish community at Justus Lipsius Church, which has been very kind to me and my family, especially Father Raymond Piringer, our pastor, Brother Paul Creevy, and Michelle Reusers. I'm so thankful for my spiritual companions at the Christian Life community and for my extended family back in the Philippines, especially my parents, Willie and Tess, and my in-laws, for giving me the care I needed to keep my spirits high during this journey. A word of gratitude is due to my mother-in-law for the thoughtfulness she has shown my immediate family. And of course to Tita Edith for giving me a small replica of the Nazareno, which served as the constant reminder of his providence as I worked on my dissertation. Finally, this endeavor would not have been possible without the magnanimity of my wife, Nev, and my two boys, Yesu and Peter. They were the driving force behind my decision to embark on this journey and see it through to the end. Because of your sacrifice and support, I completed this dissertation on time. Thank you so much, Nev, Yesu, and Peter for your patience, understanding, and encouragement over the last 5 years. God only knows the hardship that we've been through all these years. Thank you so much for bearing with me and for sacrificing too. I dedicate this fruit of my hard labor to all of you. Consumatum est. Mabuhay, long live, it's time to rejoice. Viva Poong Jesus Nazareno! Viva! So we can have a picture taking, and then after that, you're all invited to join the reception in Zal Couvreur. So see you at the reception.
Do they know where to go?
I just said Zal Couvreur.
Yeah. They know where to find it? Go outside, left.
You just have to go outside and then turn left. You can see a signage that says Zal Couvreur.
And so the second floor.
It's on the second floor of the building.
You can open it now.
Open it later.